Chapter 9: Constructing Gender and Sexuality. The terms sex and gender are often used interchangeably, but sociologists differentiate between the two. Sex refers to an individual's membership in one of two biologically distinct categories, male or female. Sometimes in our society, we see these terms used interchangeably. For instance, on a job application, you might see a checkbox that says, select your gender, male or female. This is an inappropriate use of the term gender. The application is actually referring to the term sex. Why do you think someone might use the term gender rather than sex? Understanding the differences between these two terms is essential for understanding the concept throughout the section. So we will spend the next few minutes making sure we're all clear about the differences. Sex. About one baby in 1,000 is born intersex, or hermaphroditic, which means having an abnormal chromosomal makeup and mixed or indeterminate male and female sex characteristics. This is a function of biological sex. Gender is different because it relates to the way that a person behaves based on his or her biological sex. In other words, we learn how to act manly or womanly based on the sex that we're born. Human sex characteristics. Distinctions between male and female is based on primary sex characteristics, including chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs, and secondary sex characteristics such as body hair, skin texture, and body proportions. Gender refers to the physical, behavioral, and personality traits that a group considers normal for its male and female members. Gender identity refers to an individual's self-definition or sense of gender, while gender expression refers to an individual's behavioral manifestations of gender. Gender is a term that describes our behaviors as feminine or masculine. In our society, it is often expected that women will behave in feminine ways and men will behave in masculine ways. Of course, we all know individuals who don't fit this description or who behave with varying degrees of femininity or masculinity. But these individuals sometimes face sanctions or negative stereotypes because their behavior contradicts the expectations of society. Gender is thus better understood as a continuum rather than a dichotomy. The term gender identity refers to an individual's self-definition or sense of gender, while gender expression refers to an individual's behavioral manifestations of gender. Essentialists see gender as biological or genetic and believe that gender is a simple, two-category, binary system determined by your chromosomes, hormones, and genitalia. It is permanent and unchanging. Essentialists are generally not sociologists. They are often in fields such as medicine, theology, and biology, although sometimes sociologists in certain subfields, like sociobiology, will also adhere to this principle. Most sociologists use a constructionist approach and see sex, gender, and sexuality as social constructs. For instance, queer theorists emphasize the importance of difference and rejects ideas of innate identities or restrictive categories of gender and sexual identity. Constructionists believe that gender is constructed or created through our interactions with other members of society. In the United States, we tend to classify people as being male or female, but other societies have different classification systems, some of which are mentioned in your textbook, and people are treated differently based on the norms associated with that other system. Sexual orientation is the inclination to be heterosexual, attracted to the opposite sex, homosexual, attracted to the same sex, or bisexual, attracted to either sex. Those who are asexual may simply reject any sexual identity at all. Although some evidence supports a biological component to sexual orientation, research in this area is still preliminary. Many have embraced the idea that sexual orientation is genetic, based on the idea that if sexuality is innate, then sexuality-based discrimination is unacceptable. While most Americans oppose gay marriage, many say they would support civil unions. Sexual orientation is not based on gender. A masculine woman is not always attracted to other women. Is sexual orientation a continuum rather than a few simple categories? Alfred Kinsey suggested that human sexuality was far more diverse than was commonly assumed. His own studies led him to believe that people were not exclusively heterosexual or homosexual, but rather could fall along a wide spectrum. The Kinsey scale of sexuality is an example of queering the binary, as it rejects binary and heteronormative categories of sexuality. Sex, gender, and sexuality are all bases of hierarchies of inequality in our society. Homophobia is a fear of or discrimination toward homosexuals or toward individuals who display purportedly gender-inappropriate behavior. Sexism, gender inequality, and homophobia can be found in past and present societies. Despite a great deal of change in recent years, homophobia is still common in American society. Some argue that the term homophobia represents a biased attitude because the term phobia implies a psychological condition, thus excusing intolerance. Gender inequality can be found in all past and present societies and can be traced back to biological differences in early societies. The activities that women could participate in were limited because they had less physical strength and because of the demands of bearing and raising children. Men delivered the most important resources to the group, such as food from hunting or land from warfare, and became powerful by controlling the distribution of these resources. Even our language and vocabulary tend to reflect a hierarchical system of gender inequality. What do the following have in common? Man-made, mankind, man-power, manslaughter. There are several sociological theories that attempt to explain why this inequality has persisted in contemporary societies. We're going to discuss several of these theories now. Functionalists believe that there are social roles better suited to one gender than the other, and that societies are more stable when certain tasks are done by the appropriate sex. Functionalists tend to believe that society functions the way it does as a result of men and women having different roles and tasks. Functionalists would likely agree that sometimes these differences result in inequalities, but that there is a purpose for this in the society. According to Talcott Parsons, men are more suited for an instrumental role, the person who provides the family's material support and is often an authority figure. Women are more suited for an expressive role, the person who provides the family's emotional support and nurturing. Talcott Parsons was a functionalist. While it may be true that men and women have traditionally filled these gender-specific roles, many contemporary theories argue that this is a result of our socialization, the way we have been taught to behave. We'll talk more about this in upcoming slides. Conflict theorists believe men have historically had access to most of society's material resources and privileges. Therefore, it is in their interest to try to maintain their dominant position. Conflict theorists point out that men stand to lose a great deal if gender inequality disappears. For example, they would have to do more unpaid work or pay to have their homes kept up and children cared for. Conflict theorists are interested in the imbalance of power in society and the struggles that people go through trying to gain access to power to which they traditionally have not had access. In many societies, it is clear that women have not had access to power and oftentimes still do not have access to power. Gender inequality can be found in all past and present societies. It invariably takes the form of patriarchy or male domination. Interactionists emphasize how the concept of gender is socially constructed, maintained, and reproduced in our everyday lives. This theory maintains that gender is shaped through our culture and our interactions with others. The idea that gender is reproduced means that adults have learned their gender roles and they teach those roles to children, and that people reinforce gender norms, thus perpetuating or reproducing gender roles. Feminist theorists apply assumptions about gender inequalities to social institutions to illuminate how gender inequality affects all areas of social life. Sociological Theories of Gender Inequality table summarizes the three major sociological frameworks approach to gender inequality. The case study uses examples to explain each framework. Take a moment and read the slide in detail. Gender role socialization is the lifelong process of learning to be masculine or feminine, primarily through four main agents of socialization: families, schools, peers, and the media. Students, ask yourself if you can identify specific examples of gender role socialization in your own life. For instance, were you ever told that a specific behavior wasn't appropriate because you were a boy or a girl? Did you ever receive a harsher or more lenient punishment because you were a boy or a girl? People are sometimes hesitant to think that the way they act out their gender has been socially constructed. Yet they are remarkably astute in noticing differences in the way they have been treated in their own lives as a result of their biological sex and subsequent gender role socialization. Families are usually the primary source of socialization and greatly impact gender role socialization. Social learning theory suggests that babies and children learn behaviors and meanings through social interaction and internalize the expectations of those around them. Children are exposed to their families as their primary agent of socialization. Oftentimes, this may be the only agent of socialization that the child experiences until they go to school. According to social learning theory, children tend to mimic significant role models in their lives. For instance, a boy sees his father working on the car. The boy looks up to his father and identifies with his father's biological sex. The boy learns indirectly, through observation, that it is a man's job to work on the car, and he internalizes that expectation for himself as well. The boy has just experienced gender role socialization. Schools also socialize children into gender roles that accord with their sex. For instance, research shows that teachers treat boys and girls differently. This may teach children that there are different expectations of them based on their sex. Schools are generally the first agent of socialization that children experience outside their immediate families. This may be the first time that children are introduced to thoughts and ideas that contradict those of their families. Therefore, schools are a very important agent of socialization. And the messages that students receive in schools can certainly have a big impact on the way children think about themselves. Research shows that in school, teachers tend to favor boys in several ways. Boys receive more attention and instructional time, are more likely to be called on in class, are posed with more challenging questions or tasks, and are given more praise for their quality of their work. What message does that send to the boys? To the girls? In Western societies, peer groups are an important agent of socialization. Teens are rewarded by peers when they conform to gender norms and stigmatized when they do not. In fact, many sociologists argue that peer groups are the most dominant agent of socialization from middle school all the way through adulthood. For example, as teens, boys tend to gain prestige through athletic ability, their sense of humor, and by taking risks and defying norms. Girls, on the other hand, tend to gain prestige through social position and physical attractiveness. When teens receive praise or punishment, they are learning which behaviors are acceptable for them based on their gender. There is no question that sexual behavior is portrayed in a highly stereotypical manner in all forms of the media: television, movies, magazines, books, video games, and so on. The media is a highly controversial agent of socialization because we know that the media impacts us. But there is much debate on how much we are impacted. We can note that in recent decades, we have seen some interesting correlations. Female models have gotten thinner, male actors have gotten more muscular, and both boys and girls are experiencing higher rates of depression, more cases of anorexia and bulimia, and greater issues with self-esteem and self-worth. However, there are some exceptions, such as the Netflix original series Transparent and media coverage of Caitlyn Jenner. Sex and gender affect almost every significant aspect of our lives. Even lifespan is different depending on sex. Females born in 2013 are expected to live an average of 81.2 years, while males are expected to live 76.4 years. Women are disadvantaged in institutional settings in our society. Compared to men, women are more likely to do a disproportionate amount of housework, earn less than their male peers at work, live in poverty. In short, women are more likely to work a second shift. The second shift, a term coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild, refers to the unpaid work, cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare, home repair, yard work, that must be done at home after the day's paid labor is complete. Female to male earnings ratios, 1960 to 2013. Take a moment to view and understand the chart on female to male earnings ratio. Note, the red line is the percentage differences between female earnings and male earnings. As of 2013, on average, females earn 78% of male earnings. Feminization of poverty refers to the economic trend that women are more likely than men to live in poverty, due in part to the gender gap in wages, the higher proportion of single mothers compared to single fathers, and the increasing cost of childcare. The gender gap in wages has contributed in part to the feminization of poverty. Number of women on corporate boards of directors by country. Take a moment to review this chart. Pay particular attention to where the United States is located on this chart. Feminism is the belief in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes, and the social movements organized around that belief. In the United States, the history of the women's movement can be divided into three historical waves. First wave, mid-19th century through 1920, focused on gaining suffrage for women. Second wave, 1960s to 1970s, focused on women's equal access to employment and education. Third wave, 1980s to present, focused on diversity among women's experiences and identities. The first wave was the earliest period of feminist activism and included the period from the mid-19th century until American women won the right to vote in 1920. The campaign organized around gaining voting rights for women was called the suffrage movement. The second wave was the period of feminist activity during the 1960s and 1970s, often associated with the issues of women's equal access to employment and education. The third wave is the most recent period of feminist activity and focuses on issues of diversity and the variety of identities that women can possess. Male liberationism originated in the 1970s to discuss the challenges of masculinity. Subsequently, the movement has split into the men's rights movement and the pro-feminist men's movement. Although originally broadly sympathetic with feminism, the men's movement has now split into the men's rights movement, a group that feels that feminism creates disadvantages for men, and the pro-feminist men's movement, a group that feels that sexism harms both men and women and wants to fundamentally change society's ideas about gender. This concludes the lecture for Chapter 9.